This is the Everything You Need to Know video series, here today with the second installment on the middle game stage, or how tactics and strategy come together in a chess game. Tactics and strategy define every specific move that is made within a chess game, with the term tactic being used to describe every capture or every threat of capture you can make in a chess game or your opponent can make, and strategy being the term that describes just about every other move, every long-term thought, every deep plan that you can develop. Every long-term weakness that you or your opponent have in your position is a strategical weakness or a positional weakness, and we're going to talk about how strategy and tactics come together and how they work together. And you better buckle up, because in the next 15 minutes we're going to jam-pack so much information into this video. It's going to move fast, it's going to be a bumpy ride, but I'm going to guarantee you results that will change your chess life. Because chess is 90% tactics, it's going to make up for the majority of this video, and it's where we're going to start. We use that term to describe chess as it being 90% tactics because every game, whether at the lowest level or highest level, must eventually be decided by a tactic. Some sort of threat, somebody missed the threat by their opponent of some kind in order to lose a chess game. So tactics, in that sense, make up for 90% of the critical moments of chess, because if you blunder, you lose. It's that simple. So, with that said, we don't really need to tell you why it's important to win your opponent's pieces. We all know that the ultimate goal of the game is to checkmate the enemy king. So informing you that you should count attackers and defenders, try to capture your opponent's pieces, shouldn't be new information to you, nor should it be that you should try to prevent your opponent from doing relatively the same thing. But what we like to do is show you the basic and critical tactical patterns you should be aware of when you play your games. Now, these are the most fundamental because we can't fit everything into this small video. What we can do is tell you that every tactical pattern, even the most advanced, are in some ways more advanced versions that are just built on top of these fundamental and critical themes that we're going to show you here today. So let's go ahead and jump right in with the first tactical pattern, that being the double attack or fork. A double attack is arguably the most common type of tactical pattern that occurs in a chess game. Essentially, the principle is simple. You move one piece to attack two enemy pieces at the same time, thus leaving your opponent in sometimes an impossible situation when it comes to defending both pieces. Here we see a very simple version, a very commonly used version to highlight the principle of a double attack. The white rook moves to f7, attacking both the knight and the bishop at one time, and white will win material shortly. A fork is the term used to describe a double attack by either the knight or the pawn. Here we see two forks in action, with the knight having the ability to move knight to e7 check, forking the king and queen, as well as we see the pawn with the ability to move forward, forking the two knights. By definition, a double attack or a fork only works if you're attacking two pieces that cannot capture you back. For example, if we replace the queen on c8 with a knight, it would not be possible for this knight to move to e7 and fork the king and knight, as he would simply be recaptured. And so, in summary, a double attack is the act of moving one piece to attack at least two enemy pieces at one time, with the fork being a term we use to describe a double attack by either the knight or the pawn. Arguably the second most common type of tactical pattern or theme that can occur in a chess game would be a pin. A pin is the act of attacking an enemy piece. However, that piece either cannot move or does not wish to move for fear of losing a more valuable piece. The first type of pin is known as an absolute pin. That would be when a piece is pinned to the king, for it is absolutely illegal for that piece to move. We see that the bishop on b5 is also applying an absolute pin to the rook. The second type of pin that can occur in a chess game, known as a relative pin, is on display here. We see the bishop attacking the knight on f6, and though that knight might like to move under certain circumstances, it would be ill-advised to do so as long as there is a queen standing behind it. Though it is not illegal for the pinned piece to move in a relative pin, it is normally not going to happen because moving the lesser valued piece would immediately result in the loss of a greater valued piece. A relative pin can also be a very powerful tool, though it is not as forcing of a tactic as an absolute pin. To quickly show you one practical example where a relative pin can occur very early on in a chess game, we can review the Queen's Gambit Decline, which is an opening we quickly went over in the Everything You Need to Know video about the opening stage, with both sides developing their pieces to either attack and defend the pressure point on d5. White applies a relative pin as early as move 4, with the sole purpose of putting pressure on the key knight that guards the center. Moving on, our next tactical pattern or theme under discussion is known as the opposite of the pin, that being the skewer. The skewer is the act of attacking a more valuable enemy piece, so that when that piece moves, you can win or capture whatever piece is behind it, whether that be an equal or lesser valued piece. In this position, we see that both white and black have the ability to skewer the opponent, depending on whose move it was, with both sides moving the rook over to check the king, and after that king is forced to a safe square, the rook would remain on pre for the opponent to capture. To see it in action, white moves over and takes the free piece. A skewer can also occur by attacking the queen and then taking whatever piece remains undefended after the queen must find safety. Though it is arguably not as forcing of a tactic as it is to attack the king and give check, you see that it can be just as powerful to attack the queen, as either she must be lost for a lesser valued rook, or find safety and allow the worse rook takes e8 checkmate. One final very common type of skewer occurs at the end of a pawn race, with both sides pushing their pawns to promote toward a queen. Here we see that though black has won the race, with an awkward king, white is able to promote and immediately apply a skewer along the diagonal, winning the undefended piece behind it. It should be noted that only the long-range pieces, being the queens, rooks, and bishops, are capable of applying pins or skewers. Let's move on. We now already begin to see tactical patterns repeat themselves, at least in some small manner. Here we're learning the discovered attack, or check. In this position, white has the ability to move this bishop, unleashing a check by the rook on d1 to the king on d8, and at the same time applying an attack to the queen. By definition, this could be known as a double attack, just like the previous example we've already given. However, it's a more advanced version of the same type of theme. We are attacking two pieces at once, but we've only been able to do so in this manner because we unleashed the attack of another. A discovery is the act of moving one of your own pieces to unleash a piece that otherwise would not be attacking the enemy. The most powerful type of discovery would be a double attack. As you can see here, that moving the bishop to any random square would also be a discovered check. However, finding the most valuable square for the bishop, that being one that attacks the enemy queen, makes perfect sense. A discovered check or a discovered double attack is one of the most powerful types of tactics you can play in chess. And if a discovered attack or a discovered check is one of the most powerful types of attacks or tactics you can play in chess, you could argue that discovered double check is the most powerful move possible in any given chess game. Here, this position is the Venus flytrap, one of the most famous mating nets known in a chess game. White begins by playing knight to f7 check, and after the king moves to g8, the most important part of why we're showing this example becomes clear. The knight moves to h6, releasing check on the king. What should be noted is that both the queen and the knight are possible captures for black. However, it is impossible to capture two pieces at once. So despite the fact that both of white's pieces are hanging per se, black is unable to do anything but move the king. A double check is the most powerful move in chess because it leaves the king to his own devices always. He's unable to move to f8 because of checkmate on f7, and quickly if he moves to h8, we see the climax of the Venus flytrap mating net, with white sacrificing the queen and delivering a smothered checkmate on f7. Again, the main point of this is not how practical in nature the theme is, nor is it really even the mating net. The idea is to show you how powerful the act of playing discovered attack or discovered check tactic can be, with the double check being the most powerful form of a discovered attack. Again, we see it end in black's demise. And on that note of witnessing one of our tactical patterns or themes for today, and in a mating net pattern or theme, as we can see here with the smothered mate, I'd like to show you two other very common types of checkmate patterns that wouldn't necessarily be classified as a tactical pattern, but are nonetheless critical enough and important enough for us to get across in today's video. The first checkmate pattern to follow the smothered mate that we just saw will be the support mate. A support mate by definition is the act of moving your queen up close and personal with the enemy king to give checkmate, where the queen finds herself supported by one other piece of the same color. Here we see arguably the most common type of support mate, with the queen giving checkmate supported by her own king. Let's use this as a second example of a support mate, with the queen coming in to checkmate the enemy king, protected by the lone minor piece, the knight, with the third, perhaps more practical version of support mate occurring here, with the white queen capturing an enemy pawn, supported for checkmate by the lone minor piece. Our final, extremely common type of checkmate pattern under discussion in today's video is the back rank checkmate. The back rank checkmate is often the climax of many different types of combination and tactical ideas that you can play in a chess game. And it occurs on either the 8th or 1st rank, depending on which king is being checkmated, when the enemy king is attacked by a lateral piece, either the rook or queen, and the king is unable to escape due to the fact that he's blocked in or imprisoned by his own pawns. A back rank checkmate can be easily avoided by a simple pawn push. However, in many complex games, often a player does not have time to make such a move. So we see the back rank as a common weakness and the subject of many different types of checkmate combinations. In conclusion, that wraps up the tactical themed and checkmate pattern portion of this video. Strategy was perhaps defined best by former world champion and father of the Soviet chess school Mikhail Botvinnik, when he said, "Tactics are the servant of strategy." What he meant precisely is that though tactics make up for 90% of chess, and you will need to use tactics in every critical moment, you will receive good tactics by understanding the strategical nature and the long-term features of every position you play. Like discussing all the tactical themes, it would be impossible for us to lay out every strategical concept within the remaining few minutes of this video. So instead, we'd like to point out what you need to be aware of when you play your games, as far as what the long-term and basic strategical features are of just about every chess game you play. To start out, let's review something we talked about in the first video. Every one of your pieces has a starting value, the rook being 5, knights and bishops 3, and the queen being worth 9. However, as you develop your pieces and activate them onto better squares, the value of those pieces may or may not go up and down in nature. So, your general goal in the beginning of the game, your first step toward having good strategy, is to develop your pieces into the center. As we pointed out, all of your pieces will do better when they are on their most active squares, and active pieces lead to good tactics. So, your first strategical tip is a very general one, and it requires no movement of the board. Put your pieces on good squares, particularly, as discussed, the center is arguably the best place for all of your pieces. And once your pieces are put in the center, there's typically two lists of criteria that you can weigh to decide on the value of your pieces. How many squares does the piece attack/control, and is the piece safe? This being a great example of two pieces that started out on equal footing, both valued at 3 points, though the knight is clearly the superior piece in this situation, having dominated the center. And here would be a second example of two pieces that would start out of equal value, though the white rook, having dominated the 7th rank, targeting all of black's pawns potentially, and keeping the king at bay, is clearly the superior piece to the black rook on f8. Essentially, if the piece is perfectly safe and controls up to its maximum number of squares, you have that piece on its best square. You're executing good piece strategy. Our final piece of fundamental strategical advice has to do with making you aware of long-term positional planning. In this abstract position, we highlight simply 3 types of pawn weaknesses that you should be aware of in your own games. First, doubled pawns, which are weak for 2 reasons. They cannot protect each other, and they stand in each other's way, thus preventing progress. Secondly, an isolated pawn, which is weak because it has no brother pawns, no pawns of the same color on either of the adjacent files. And finally, backward pawns, which are weak due to the fact that they cannot move forward 1 move for obvious reasons, nor can they move forward 2 moves because of fear of en passant. In this situation, the white pawn on g5 holds back both of black's pawns that are backward on h7 and f7. In review, chess is 90% tactics, and you need to know these fundamental tactical patterns in order to have success in your chess games. If any of these patterns remain unclear, please back up and review those segments of the video. The basic checkmate patterns often occur at the end or as the climax of many tactical combinations. You need to be aware of these 3. Tactics are the servant of strategy, and good pieces lead to good tactics. Please be aware that pawns will also help you in developing long-term strategical